We have questions that have been provided, and I think I can start things off with a conversation with my colleague, Dr. Melnick. There has been many criticisms of the NTP, and as you are aware, the Food and Drug Administration basically said that this animal study that they originally had requested was now no longer relevant to humans. Could you please comment on the general relevance of animal studies for humans and on the specifics of why this study, in your opinion, is relevant to humans and why you reject the criticism of the FDA?
Okay. Well, first of all human carcinogens are carcinogenic in animals. In human studies, there's issues related to confounding factors, and there's much more precision in understanding dose from an animal study than a human study. For example, as you mentioned, the distance of the antenna to the tissue that is exposed makes a big difference in dose. Now, a number of the criticisms, one I tried to deal with in my presentation was the issue of the control animals appearing to die earlier than the exposed animals. However, as I pointed out, with the CDMA, which had the highest response rate, there was no difference between the controls and the 6 watt per kilogram CDMA exposed animals. The other issue that FDA relies on, and they rely, I would say 99% on what ICNIRP provides. ICNIRP is the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation. It's a self-appointed committee that makes recommendations, and these are followed in Europe, and the FDA for some reason seems to buy into that. One of the issues that they raise is heating, that the animals were heated, assuming the animals were heated in the NTP study, and that it was due to excessive heating. Well, first of all, there's a number of reasons why this is not valid. There's no demonstration that any heating effect caused by the radiation in the NTP study is carcinogenic. There was no indication of a heating effect on the animals. Their body weights were the same in the control and the exposed. Clinical observations were taken throughout the study. There were no clinical observations indicated within the study in exposed animals that would give rise to evidence for metabolic stress, which has been proposed. In the pre-chronic study, the 28-day study, there was no tissue damage. So there's no evidence that there was a heating effect within the study. If you look at the data, it's based on assumption as opposed to data. And another point to recognize is that, as you mentioned, I think, water is a strong absorber of radiofrequency radiation. Well, the brain tissue, the glial cells and the Schwann cells have very high lipid content. These are not necessarily the high absorbing cells with exposure. So there's no evidence to support this. So what we're left with is experimental data versus assumption. And in my view, data is correct until the assumption is proven, and that hasn't been done.
Yeah, and it's the record established that was discussed in the hearing that was just held this Monday before the United States Circuit Court of Appeals. There is ample evidence that the FDA worked with you in the beginning to ask for the study, to design the study, to review it at several parts along the way. And then when the new regime came in and the results proved inconvenient, then the new people at the FDA said, oh, no, we don't really want to use animal studies. And what makes this especially preposterous, as you've noted in several publications, including in Health Physics, is that animal studies form the foundation for all of what FDA does with drugs. So they do studies in animals in order to predict effects in humans and prevent them from happening. And in this time, we're left debating them, as Dr. Russell noted in her presentation. I'd like to turn now, thank you, Dr. Melnick, to Dr. Russell and ask you a couple of questions. Are there auditory effects of radio frequency radiation? After all, the hearing nerve is quite exposed quite clearly, as Dr. Melnick just indicated. And are there effects on the eye that have been confirmed? Thank you, Dr. Russell.
Hi, thanks so much. And I do want to also just applaud Libby Kelly and her group, Magda Havas, as well as Deborah Davis and all the presenters here. And those are the shoulders that I stand on. So I just want to say, I've looked at the literature and impressed with everyone's work, but there's been so much that people have done for decades to prepare for this. And I just want to acknowledge that. And thank you so much, Deborah. So with regards to the hearing question, there are studies that demonstrate some hearing loss. And I can't go through all of these, but there are several. One I just want to bring up was a study done in 2017 by DOS. And it was a study called, it was on prolonged mobile phone use in medical students. And what they did is they looked at researchers. The researchers looked at medical students who used a phone for about 5 years, and they examined differences in the ear that was used both from the phone and the opposite unexposed ear. And they found a significant difference in both the air conduction and bone conduction. And they said more studies are needed, but in the meantime, it's best to reduce the usage of the phone. And there's several other studies, and we can put them in the chat and link to them. Actually, Environmental Health Trust has some links to these on their site. And with regards to eyes, there's several issues with regards to the eyes. And we have, and I will put it on the, I guess on the Q&A if I can, the 3 issues. One are the effects of blue light that we get from all these digital screens. And that's oxidative retinal damage. And there's more studies that are showing that as you use this blue light, we have it in all the lights, are not only our cell phones and iPads, but we also have them in TVs to reduce energy use. A great thing to reduce energy use, but it does have effects, especially close up if you're using digital devices very close. So that's one issue. The other issue on blue light is its effects on the hypothalamus, and that can reduce melatonin levels and disrupt the circadian clock, and that regulates our sleep patterns. So those effects are on our mdsafetech.org site, and I can put that in the chat box, but if you go to mdsafetech.org, go under the column for scientific literature, and you just go down to eye effects, and you'll see a lot of literature there on that. The other aspect for eyes is a direct effect of the radio frequency radiation on the eye. And those articles, the articles that are compiled are actually in my article that I wrote on 5G telecommunications and public health implications, and I'll put that in the chat as well. And there are several. There's not a huge amount, but there are a lot. There's a lot of information on eyes that shows that the lens can be adversely affected by heat. That's very well known. But with regards to the non-thermal effects on eyes, there are several studies that indicate that there can be harm, and I'll discuss some of those. But the 5G is a particular problem because when you're looking at 5G, of course, 5G is a mix of radiation wavelengths. When I wrote my article in 2018, we were just talking about millimeter waves, and the onset of 5G and everything will have only millimeter waves. But of course, as has been discussed by many people, that's not just a it's not just 5G millimeter waves, it's all the wavelengths that we're going to be exposed to. And so there's indication that these can have an effect. And the millimeter waves, the problem with the 5G millimeter waves that they plan to use are that they have this beam forming technology, and that has very focused high energy wavelengths that currently there's some evidence at the current levels that they're looking at. If you go to 5G telecommunications science, you'll look down and see these studies, and it shows that there can actually be even overheating of the skin from this. And if the eye is so vulnerable to heat then this is going to be another important risk factor that we have to take into account with all the 5G phones.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. I wanted to just add that we now understand that our skin is our largest immunological organ. It is our largest organ, and it's now understood that even though effects may get a little bit into the skin, they have profound effects on the liver, on the entire body.